good example of, and I know you live pretty simple, but relatively speaking, what would have been enough when you were 25? Way less than you've got now.
Yeah. Well,
And then
yeah.
it's why, why? That's the question.
I knew at about 25, that was the time where I'm just like, okay, screw all this. I just want to make money. I was so frustrated with being poor and working my ass off and nobody wanted to pay me. And I got to a point where nobody's going to pay me. I got to do my own thing. And that's what kind of drove me to the point to where, and that and many jobs that I took, that I just realized I wasn't motivated until I did it myself. When I became the boss that's cracking the whip on myself.
Yeah.
And that's what really, I don't know, it wasn't an epiphany. It was kind of a slow realization over time. And a buddy of mine told me before we had kids, he said, "When do you have kids? What do you see how that motivates you?" And boy, was he right. So,
yeah, you hear that a lot.
Somebody else is really dependent on you. I mean, that was a wake up call.
So do you think that was your number one reason for kind of going out on your own and being an entrepreneur, was that you weren't dependent on anyone else? You could, sky was the limit as long as you were willing to work?
I think it comes down to the thing that Clint Eastwood said: a man's got to know his limitations. Didn't he say that?
Sure.
Like
nobody's fact checking this show, buddy.
Yeah, whatever. But no, I think it's one of those things where, I learned my limitations and I learned what's going to motivate me. And if I'm not motivated, I'm not going to go out and be your best salesman or your best whatever. I'm going to work just hard enough to keep my job, and especially in the environment back then. I mean, you were in, I don't even know, you were in probably junior high at the time, but it was a terrible market where people would take you in and they would give you a job. And when you got to the point to where, okay, I need a raise, I've worked for you this long, I've done well, I've done all this, they turn you loose, they get the next guy coming out of college. Yeah. And it was, whenever you were worthy of benefits, they would just drop you. And I had a lot of friends that happened to.
When about 2 months before that stock was supposed to vest, I'm guessing.
Yeah. I didn't get in that, but I got to the point to where, benefits and more money, more salary, higher commissions, a lot of stuff that was promised to me, when I started, when that was starting to come, they'd be like, yeah, well, we're not going to be able to give you that, but, we'll give you a good reference for your next job. So,
right.
Shit. So that kind of thing happened back then. So it was just a slow accumulation of experiences like that got me to the point to where I'm never going to make the money I want to make. I'm never going to be able to support a family that I really want. When I met Ellen, we both were at the position where, all right, we've done all the other things. We're ready to start a family. And she was killing it. She was making so much money, and she could have stayed there and probably, made a lot, but she didn't want to. She wanted to be home with the kids, and I wanted to give her that. So that was another inspiration that drove me to the point to where, I got to try this on my own. I'm the only one that's going to motivate me the way that it's going to work for me personally.
Yeah.
Because somebody else is just like, yeah, whatever.
So let me ask you this. And I've known you a long time, and I don't know that I've ever asked you this question, which surprises me as the words are coming out of my mouth. But, tell people just real quick kind of what you do. But more importantly, you're in a unique kind of 4-person all family business, which there's 2 questions I have around that. So it's a 3-question answer total. It's what do you do? Who is Ken? And then it is, how did all 4 people align at the same time, or did they? And then really, how have you made that work over the years? Because, Ramsey always says that the only ship that doesn't float is a partnership.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of things that go into that answer. I'm a builder. I think I was built to be a builder, just because of the sheer joy that I get out of seeing, starting something and completing it. It just works with my psyche. In, was it? I guess we're coming up on 25 years. So 1998, I was, couldn't find anything that I really got excited about. My son had just been born. I spent several months at home taking care of him. And while Ellen was just making great money back in the day of telecom, 25 cents a minute for long distance. And then these guys came along and took all that away. So it was a dying industry anyway. But at the time she was doing very well. She's a great salesperson. And I wish I had what she had at the time, but I stayed at home. I took care of Jack, and then that didn't really fulfill me. And so I said, well, we've got a lot that came with our house that we bought right next door. And I think I'm going to build a house there. I said, real estate's a great thing. We should try real estate, and I loved the house that we bought. I was doing all kinds of handiwork on it. I had been in the business of selling tools and equipment and things like that. So I kind of had, a lot of people that I'd been around that were in that kind of work, and it kind of looked like something I could do. And so I built my first house, didn't know anything about it. I went to the local community college, took a class that taught me how to pass the GC test. So I got my general contractor's license. I learned how to borrow money from this insane guy who turned out to be a mortgage broker who lost everything in in 2008. But at the time, he was teaching me all these great things, and most of them were legal. So I latched onto him, borrowed money from him several times. But anyway, I built my first house. I enjoyed it so much. We moved in and we're like, holy cow, I can't believe we're living in a new house that we built and it's not falling down around us. And it costs this much. And then I'm like, wait a minute, I had an appraisal on this when I transferred over to my mortgage, and it was worth this much. I'm like, wow, there's money. Yeah. So boom, that was the first light bulb. So so that's how that I kind of got into that. And so over the years, well, let's see, let me go back. Over the next 6 months or so, I was talking to Ellen about starting a business and doing this for a living, and you could stay at home. And I'm always a big idea guy. I'm like always out there pitching the big idea. And she was like, yeah, whatever. I want to quit my job. I'd love to stay at home. And so that would be great. And I said, but I really would like a partner in this. And she said, well, call my brother. He hates his job. He's down in Atlanta. And he was going through the same thing I was. He was just miserable. He was working a dead-end job, sitting in a cubicle all day. So he comes up to Charlotte. He sits in my brand new kitchen. And I remember I'm up on the countertop and I'm talking to him. And I'm like, I didn't know PowerPoint at the time, but I'm up there. I've got pictures. I've got surveys. I've got all this. This is what I want to do. And I'd love to have you as a partner. And he just listened to the whole thing. And I'm thinking he's into it. Because, I mean, Rod. Yeah. Rod's just smiling and doing like this. And we get to the end of it. He looks at me and he goes, I don't think so. I'm like, what? What are you talking about? Yeah. And he just couldn't. His wife was making great money at the time. They're living in Atlanta. And he just couldn't at the time get his head around it.
So you had to convince him to come along.
Well, I tried. We talked, but Rod makes up his mind. You think that's it. So he leaves, and I'm thinking in the back of my head, you'll be sorry, or you'll be back, or whatever. Well, lo and behold, 2 hours later, he's knocking on my front door, and I open the door, and he goes, let's do it. I mean,
I love it. I love it.
All the way back to Spartanburg. So halfway back, talked to his wife on the phone. I think he stopped at a payphone and talked for 30 minutes and said, I think we can do this. And Kathy was just like, well, if it makes you happy, let's do it. So he came back and said, let's do it. And that's when Bannister Homes started. I mean, we got incorporated 6 months later. And I think that was June of 1999. So we're coming up 25th anniversary.
25 years, buddy. That is nuts.
Yeah, I know, right? So I hope I'm answering the questions right. I'm just kind of going.
No, absolutely. I'd be curious, probably more than anything, is what the family dynamic, working with.
That's the best part.
Because Nicole and I have our own episode, right? That we do every third episode on this show. And that's always what people want to know. How do you work with your wife? And in your case, it's compounded. You work with your wife, your brother-in-law, and his wife.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I look at it this way. Okay. I've always, when I do something, I feel like if I feel good about it, it's 100%. And this was 100% from the moment Rod knocked on my door coming back. that he and I are going to be great partners. I mean, I've known, I knew Rod at the time for maybe 3 years, and I knew what a great guy he was, and that, we could make this work, and I'd love to get him to Charlotte anyway. And so I knew Rod was the right fit from the start. It took a while for us to wean ourselves off the salaries that the women were earning, but we eventually did, and we got to the point to where there was probably a couple years between, I don't know, 2000 and 2002, where they were still working their jobs and making, our cash flow. And Rod and I were figuring things out. We made a few mistakes. We built a house and lost money on it, but we learned, so much from that experience. And then slowly but surely, we started making profits on some of the things that we were doing, and we stood by everything we did. I think that really made us stand out. We were not, we'll do the job for this much, and if we lose money, well, we just learned from it. But we didn't screw people. And then I think in 2003 we bought a piece of land, talked to my crazy financer, and he hooked us up with a good loan, and we built our first spec house. And we sold it, I think, for $700,000, which was just absolutely insane. Now that house would probably sell for $2 million now in Charlotte. Yeah. But I just remember when I got the offer and we were sharing it around, I called my mother and I said, "We sold a house for $700,000." I said, "Can you believe that?" And she couldn't at all. She couldn't believe a house would cost that much. But that was when things started turning to where we started making some decent money, and where I could say to Ellen, just quit what you're doing. I think she
how long of a timeline was that from
probably 2 years.
2 years?
Probably, yeah. So about 2002 was, when this kind of started. And I think about 2003, 2004, Ellen came over, or Ellen quit her job, and she started just slowly doing some things here and there with design. She's got a great eye for design. She's not a trained designer, but she definitely has the knack, and she knows how to manage a project from a design standpoint. And that's very important to us. So she's our design coordinator. It's not necessarily a designer, but she helps people figure things out. And then Kathy came along, and Kathy, right from the start, she just said, "Well, I'm going to be the salesperson, and I'm going to do the contracts." And we're like, deal. So everybody just kind of fell into their place. Yeah. I started taking care of the books just because I'm kind of anal and retentive about that. But there was no discussion about, you're going to do this and you're going to do that, and I'm going to be the president, I'm going to tell you what to do. It was just kind of evolved, which is great.
So what's the biggest challenge you've overcome? Because I mean, clearly you've made it work. You don't go 25 years without saying it works, right? And I think people wish they were in your shoes. So give me the low spot.
Just to get to the family part, was you're all in. I mean, you either, if the business fails, the marriage could go with it, and if the marriage fails, where am I going to get another, I'm not going to be able to run the company, or she's not going to work for us. It's going to be very awkward. So it's not an incentive. It's a demand that we have to get along. And I mean, we've yelled at each other. We've cried in meetings. We've been through a lot of things. We've gotten counseling as a group. But at the end of the day, it's just, you got to do it. There's no alternative. So I don't know. I think more people should probably look at things that way. There's a lot of people, I think, that jump into things and like, it doesn't work out, with marriages or whatever. And I think that, Ellen and I we take our vows seriously, and I know Rod and Kathy do too. And the vow transfers into our business, because it couldn't work any other way. And I don't want to do anything but this, and I don't want to do it with anyone but them.
Yeah. What comes to mind for me is when you hear of a business and they say, well, we treat our employees like family. And it's like, when you have to, because they are your family. Mm-hmm. And if that wasn't lip service, if people really did treat the people they work with like they're their wife, or like they're their brother-in-law, how different things would work out.
Yeah. I mean, it's the real deal here. And the thing, I think something you said in your podcast was, when do you turn it off? When do you turn off the business? And for us, we enjoy it so much that we just talk about it all the time. Nobody ever says, let's stop talking about business, because everybody loves talking about it because it's fun. I mean, you were in the business.
Oh yeah.
When you're doing well and things are going good, you talk about it. And when things are going bad, you want to vent about it. And the best people to talk about it are people that understand. So that's, you know, that's, I don't know if that's weird or not, but that's just how it works for us.
I don't think it's weird. I think probably the difference just in that one example would be, Nicole supports me, 1,000%, but she doesn't want to talk about coaching all day or the different, it's just not her thing,
Right.
so I mean, and I guess I shouldn't say it's not her thing. It's different for her, right? Where if we were both like my friends Ted and Elizabeth, I'm sure they'll probably listen to this show. Ted and I went to Brown, we were in the same cohort, and Elizabeth, I think, was one cohort before. So they never stopped talking about coaching and all the things that go around it because they're both in the same thing, right? So I think it's neat. That's probably, if you really dissected it, a lot of the reason you all have worked as well as you have, because everyone's on the same bus in the right seat moving forward, right? Like you're the classic example of what that should look like.
Well, I don't know, if I ever wrote a book, it'd be 2 pages and, just have the things that we're talking about. And, I don't know if it'd sell or not, but I could tell you very quickly that, you commit 100% to what you're doing and who you're doing it with. And you can't fail from that standpoint. I mean, you can fail in building, you could fail in making money, but you can't fail as far as keeping yourself happy with working with the family.
Yeah.
I don't think I don't think I've heard you say this several times in your other things. It's not for everyone, and it's not. You have to be. It has to be exciting to you, and that's really what excites me. Is just we have our Monday and our Thursday meeting. I love getting together with them because we start talking about new stuff.
Possibility.
Certain part of the meeting where that's just new thing I'm working on right here. It's going to be our next townhouse that we're going to build. I can't wait to talk on Thursday about it because I got some exciting things that I've been working on, and I know they'll come up with some cool things. Now there's other times when they're we're just going at it, but for the most part, I cannot wait to get together and talk about the future with them. So I don't know.
Have you ever wished you were doing something else?
When I was younger, I always, this is something I want to tell my kids. I don't think they're ready to hear it, but especially my son. I want to tell them, don't compare yourself with other people that you think are doing great. I did that for a long time. I thought when I worked for a company called Vermont American, and I was in outside sales, I was in retail, and I liked it. It was a great job. But my buddy Charlie Brown, he moved up to national sales. And I'm like, wow, that's where I need to be. National sales, calling on Home Depot and Lowe's and all this, and those transfer into these big jobs down the road. Well, it just sounded like a big party. Sounded like they're just having fun. Those guys are kind of a small team, and I thought that I was going there. Well, they didn't take me there, and I was stuck in retail. And it took a lot of hindsight to go back to that and say, you know what? I'm sure his life wasn't great. He had his own problems with that, just like I had problems with what I was doing. So I really, really, really tried not to compare myself to someone else and say, I want to be in their shoes, because you don't know where their shoes are going or where they've been. So that was a big kind of realization to me in my later 20s. As I had a lot of jobs, I bounced around, but I just wasn't happy until I started working for myself. But while I was figuring that out, it was just, all the things that I wanted that drove me in certain directions were all for the wrong reasons. So that's why I was so happy when I finally you just need to work for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the deep dive I do with people all over the world every day. It's why I love my job so much I love building too. But I learned a lot. And I think what I hear is that you did a lot of soul searching and learned a lot about yourself in all of those other jobs that allowed you to move into this role and say, I'm happy here. And I think a lot of people don't have that experience, and they're constantly, we talk about the 5 phases. It's the next episode or the one that came out today, but we get to that anxious philosopher where it's like, okay, I'm selling some stuff. It's great. And everybody thinks I'm great, but is this all there is? and then you go back to the shiny thing again. And I see people just repeat that loop forever, and then they die. And they never really asked what makes you happy, and I feel, does that sound right? Did you kind of do that work?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you don't really know when you're happy. You definitely know when you're not, but happiness is a hindsight thing in a lot of ways. I think you look back on things and like, I was really happy then, regardless of how much money I had. I was a lifeguard down in Myrtle Beach when I was 20. I had no money. It was the happiest time of my life. I just had, I was able to sustain myself in different ways. I mean, I had a job, but I didn't really have enough money to have, to do a lot of things, but I was so happy. And so, but I didn't realize it at the time.
Yeah.
You're like, God, I need to make more money. I don't know. I wish you could. It's hard to impart that to young people. It's and the other thing I try to say to my kids is, you got to make a lot of mistakes. I'm here to tell you of all the mistakes that I've made. If you want to hear about them,
Right.
we can talk about them. And if that helps you, with your path, I'd love to talk to you about it. But
and they're not listening to a word you have to say.
No, they're not. No.
I always say the older I get, the smarter my dad becomes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Like you look back, you're like, yeah, whatever, guy. And it's like, damn, he was right again.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, I told you some of the sayings my dad said. You put it in the book. It's brilliant. He was a smart man. And I like the one thing he said in his later years. I'm like, man, where'd you pull that one out of? He said, there's always one more asshole in this world than you gave it credit for. When I was just pissed off at somebody, I'm like, God almighty, Dad, we're gonna write that down somewhere. And he was a smart guy.
Love it. I was thinking about Jack the other day, and what you just said brought it up. Jack's your son, by the way. I think we got that across. But you compare yourself to other people, and what you just said about you need to go out there and fail a lot. What we see is the end result, because people never post the 1,000 times they fail. You know how many businesses I've started that went nowhere?
Yeah.
All kinds of them, but we don't talk about those. We talk about the construction company. We talk about the real estate company. Well, you and I have, and certainly I talk about it more in the book and more here, but we compare ourselves with the guy that's on roll 1,000 of the dice, and you're on roll 10 and you're wondering why you're not doing so good.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I say make mistakes. I don't mean go out and, crash your car or do all, anything that's going to hurt you. I mean, make valuable mistakes that don't cost anything. You may have hurt feelings, but you're going to be wiser when you come out of it. And again, whenever I've said that, it's always the wrong timing with my son, but I think eventually he'll remember those things, just like I remember a lot of the things my dad said at the time. I'm like, shut up, Dad.
Right. So let me ask you this. If I typically work with that person who they wake up every day. They have all the Western signs of success, but yet they feel isolated because they can't talk to anyone about their quote unquote first world problems, because they're making money. They've got the SUV, they've got the new house that they just built. They've got all those things. So what do you have to complain about? So how does that person get unstuck? And have you ever been, it doesn't sound like it, at least not since you started the company, but have you ever been in that position?
No, not really. Because Ellen and I were talking the other day about, the first day you realize that you had money. And I'm just always chasing it, chasing the dollar as hard as I can. And I don't spend any of it. So it's just been recently that I'm like, we're doing all right. And everybody says that if you have money, you're going to be unhappy. I don't think you're going to. I look at money as comfort. I just want to be comfortable. I just want to make sure that I can take care of my family. I can donate money to where I want to donate it and make a difference that way. And just, have a future that I've prepared for to one day do very little. which I don't think will ever happen. I think I'll do what I'm doing until, you know, I get hit by a train or something. I don't know. But I don't think I'll ever just lay down and stop. But yeah, it's coming from somebody who had two parents of the Depression, and the type of things I think that they didn't intentionally instill in me about money and well, let me go to this. This is one of the best gifts that my parents ever gave me. All right, we were dirt ass poor. My dad worked at Sears for 43 years. He never made like over $18,000, and my mother had to start a bridal shop where she was making very little. But my brother and I went to college with no debt. Um, you know, we thought that we were wealthy. I mean, I was probably kind of a jerk about it because I thought I was rich because all the people around us were so stinking poor. And I look at that as the greatest gift my parents ever gave me, not to make me a pretentious jerk, but to make me feel like, I was well off. And I wanted to do that with my kids, except not, except they were well off, and I didn't want to turn them into little assholes. You know what I mean? So, sorry.
Yeah, I think what you just said carries a lot of weight. It's you felt well off because you were well off relatively. And that goes back exactly to what we were just talking about with Jack. He's comparing himself to Jack. He's doing really well. That's why I start every day with a wheel of gratitude. What are all the things I'm grateful for in my life?
I love that. I love that. And I've tried to share a lot of that stuff with him. And he's going through a tough time right now because he hates his job, but he's making a lot of money. But then the people around him are making so much more. Again, it's the reverse of what, I went through as a kid. I thought I was wealthy and I wasn't. He thinks he's not wealthy and he really is.
Yeah.
But it's that time of life. That was a tough time of life for me. And I always told my kids, I said, the 20s are hard. You come out of college and you're thrown out into the world. You have no idea what you're going to do. And everyone is asking you, well, what are you going to do now? And that used to drive Jack up the wall. I said, well, you got to have some kind of answer for them because they're going to ask. But your 20s is going to suck. Your 30s, it gets really good. So just enjoy your 20s the best you can. And his 20s are a lot better than mine were. Mine were pretty rough.
I think that's probably one of the things I've noticed most in my travels, and certainly when I lived in Costa Rica for that little bit, but just the relative happiness. We really do have all the things we need to have a pretty great life, and you don't have to have $10 million in the bank. And what I hear in Jack is just a values misalignment, and it's one of those things that you can't think about. What you just said. He's in a job he hates, but he's making a lot of money, and he thinks, but the other guys are making even more money. But it sounds to me like money's not the problem. So, and I have that qualifier when I take on a new client where they have to be, quite profitable. I mean, I'm talking $10,000, $20,000 a month profit as an entrepreneur before I'll consider working with them. And I tell people that the number that could be $1,000 a month, but you have to understand that more money is not going to solve the problem. Yes. Because if you're miserable at $10, you're gonna be miserable at $100, you're gonna be miserable at $10,000.
Yeah. Now you're quoting your book, I think. I've read your book.
So.
And I think that's why I think your book is a valuable thing. I gave it out to a bunch of kids at App State for the construction management program. I think it's should be required reading for some of these kids. It's an easy read. It's got some very, very simple things to do in it. And when my kids come home, I'm going to make them go home with a copy and read it as well. I think it's valuable information. I wish I'd have had it at their age. At my age, it's not. I think it's better for me to use it as a guidebook for them to kind of give them some advice. But yeah, it's very valuable information. I hope it helps a lot of them.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what I wrote it for. I mean, I wrote it because it's what I wish I had. You know, it's the reason I'm a coach for other entrepreneurs, because it's what I wish I had.
Yeah.
You know, and so I'm fortunate that I'm able to do that. And I think kind of similar to your business, because I sold the last business and bought myself a lot of runway, I'm able to build it the way I want to build it. You know, but that was always the goal, right? So interesting. So, buddy, if you had to give somebody one piece of advice, there doesn't matter where they're at on the journey, you know, I would consider you, you know, you're in that business Buddha territory, you know, where, you know, you said it, you don't question what you're doing, you know, you're doing the right thing. And there's a lot of people that wish they were in your position. You know, what one piece of advice would you give them, other than read my book? Of course.
Second piece of advice is, if you feel like you're doing the right thing, then you most likely are. It's tempting to do things for maximum profit, but if you always know in your heart that you're doing the right thing by your customers, by the people that you work with, by your family, by everybody, if you know in your heart, and you got to ask yourself that you're doing the right thing, you probably are. But I don't know, there's a lot of things that can pull you in other directions. I mean, you know, you got the angel here, the devil here, he's pulling you over, saying, hey, you could probably make an extra 10% if you did, you know. But if you always do the right thing, you're going to sleep good at night. The money will be there, I promise you. Especially when you're starting out, you be the guy that does what he says. And that honestly, I guess if I could page one of my book, say what you're going to do and do what you say. That's all it really takes. I mean, you can be very successful in a lot of different things because there's so many people that just BS around that. But if you do what you say you're going to do, even if it's not profitable, success will follow that.
Love it. I think we can stop right there, my friend.
Right. Well.